Welcome back to Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio, one of the largest amusement parks in the United States. And here is the entrance concourse. You can see the Peanuts characters' topiary figures there. And let's move over to the actual entrance area. Now you notice it says Top Thrill 2 will not open today. And that was the main reason I went to the park, was to try it out. And we'll get to that a little later. So here we are at the main midway inside the gates. You can see they still have the 150th anniversary sign still up. Behind that is the 1912 Daniel Mueller Carousel. And there's Ocean Motion, the pirate ship, and Gatekeeper over on the right. So we're going to make a counterclockwise swoop through the park and get to the main event, part of which you can see in the distance there. That's the main thing that's changed this year. There are a few other little changes in the park. The carousel was installed at Cedar Point in 1946. It's moved around a little bit. I like the position there, and it has a working band organ, which is always a plus. Point Plaza here is one of the largest gift shops in the park, and Cedar Point has absolutely amazing merchandise. And I don't think I've ever taken a walk through here, so let's go in and you'll get to see how big it is and get to see the amount of Cedar Point merchandise they have. Pretty much anything you could want for a souvenir, whether it's magnets or shirts or recreations of the roller coasters, you'll find it all in here and in the other gift shops scattered throughout the park. All right, it's also air conditioned in here, which is nice on a hot day. So in front of us now is the Sky Ride Station. We're at the south end of the park heading north. Over on the right is the ubiquitous Starbucks coffee. And then the blue building over on the right used to be Toff's Ice Cream. And Toff's is a local ice cream company that's pretty darn good. And they had the best milkshakes in the park. Cedar Point decided to bring it all in-house. And so now at all of the locations, they're serving Blue Bunny ice cream. So if you like Blue Bunny, you get your Blue Bunny fix at Cedar Point. So we're going to stay to the right here and move by the Midway Games. It was very early in the day when I was in the park. I had an early entrance, so there aren't a lot of people here, and a lot of the games and concessions weren't yet open. They did open a little later on in the day, so it's not like Cedar Point is keeping everything closed all day. And if you like huge plush to take home with you, they certainly have plenty of them at the games. Cedar Point opened in 1870, making it the second oldest amusement park in the United States. It sits on 364 fairly flat acres, which makes it easy to get around. And the park has changed a lot over the years. The big changes really started in the 1980s when the coaster wars began, and Cedar Point led the way, building one record-breaking roller coaster after another, and that really put it on the map for most people. And they have still some of the biggest rides of their kind ever made. Over here in front of us, you can see the Kiddie Kingdom. There are 3 separate kiddie areas in the park. This is one of them, a very colorful area. In front of us is Max Air, a giant Huss Frisbee ride. And you can also see the Ferris wheel in front of us, the giant wheel. Lots of beautiful plantings, lots of shade in the park. And in front of us in the distance, you can see the park's second big carousel. It's a 1924 Denzel, and it's on the National Register of Historic Places. Many of the rides in Kiddie Kingdom are vintage, like these vintage Herschel jets. You've got this wonderful Mangles Kiddie Whip over here. And they're in beautiful condition. We're now heading on toward the east end of the park. There's a big Dodgem arena, or bumper cars. The park is essentially a long peninsula that stretches out into Lake Erie. It's surrounded by water on all sides, and that is a really impressive sight when you're on any of the big roller coasters, like Millennium Force, which we'll see later, or Steel Vengeance, or Magnum, because all you're looking out onto is this expanse of water. So there's the giant wheel. Behind it is the Grand Pavilion, which is a really good eatery. And this is the newest section of the park, the boardwalk section, made to look like an old Cedar Point boardwalk. The big yellow roller coaster there is the Wild Mouse, which is a spinning mouse coaster that went in last year. There's a Matterhorn ride. And in the background, that big tower is Windseeker, which is essentially a very tall swing ride. And you can see a scrambler there in the distance, and a few of the administrative buildings there off in the distance. And that essentially ends that section of Midway. There's a gate there that takes you out to the Breakers Hotel complex, and that's actually an exit from the park. So we're going to move this way and take a detour through the Planet Snoopy area, which is another kiddie area that they have. It's really nicely landscaped. And as you might expect from the name, this is all themed to Peanuts characters. Even though the park looks pretty empty at this hour, and the skies look pretty threatening, everything cleared up later on. We had beautiful blue skies during the day, and the park got really crowded. On a normal day, you'll see about 30,000 people in this park, and on crowded days, you'll have 50 to 60,000 people on the Midway. So the ride waits can get pretty long, especially for something like the new Top Thrill 2, which we'll be talking about. You can see wait times of up to 4 hours on that on a busy day. So given that, it's probably a good idea if you come to Cedar Point, plan to spend a couple days, because it's so big that you'll definitely not have enough time to do everything in just one day, even if it's a beautiful day and even if you get there early. And there are lots of options if you want to stay in the area. Cedar Point, as I said, has the Breakers Hotel. They also have cabins out on Lake Erie, on Lighthouse Point. They have an RV park. There's the Breakers Express, which is less expensive. And then there are all sorts of other hotels in the area. So plenty of places to stay for different amounts of budget that you have. Over on the left, you saw Valravn going through its course. Here is the North Station for the Sky Ride. There's the old Cedar Point Water Tower. Over on the right are more administrative buildings. The red track that you see far in the distance on the right, that's Magnum. We'll get a look at that a little later. And this blue track in front of us is Corkscrew, which was the first roller coaster in the world to have 3 inversions. And it's still running great. And it's a beautiful positioning of this ride. And that's one thing Cedar Point does very well, is all of the rides are in your face. So they don't hide the fact that they're a traditional Midway. They don't hide the fact that it's an amusement park. It's not trying to be a theme park. It's just rides, rides, rides. That's what the place is all about. The big red, white, and blue tower in front of us is Power Tower, which is a 300-foot drop tower. Over on the left, the orange and red track is Iron Dragon, which is one of the last aero suspended coasters around, and it's a really fun ride. It's one of my favorite rides in the park. They jokingly have called it Dragon Iron because it's not really fast, but that's not the point of it. It's just that swinging motion that you get, which is a rare thing. You don't find that on many roller coasters anymore. And this blue station that you see in front of us, blue and white station, that is Top Thrill 2, which is the rebuild of Top Thrill Dragster that closed 2 years ago. It was reimagined by the Italian company Zamperla. And, well, let's take a look at the corkscrew going around here first. And that shows you how Cedar Point lets you get up close and personal with all these big rides. So there is the addition to Top Thrill. It's a second tower, and it's a spike. And it used to be the entirety of Top Thrill Dragster was 17 seconds start to finish. You get blasted out of the station with an air launch, and you go up over that tower in the distance and come down, and that was it. Well, the way it's been reimagined is you go forward partway up the tower, then you come back down, then you're blasted back up that spike, and then you come down, and then you're blasted over the tower. So it essentially tripled the length of the ride, which is good. But because the ride is longer, you would expect it's longer wait times on a busy day. But it does look spectacular. Unfortunately, when I was there, and this seems to be a case with almost all parks I go to, when there's a new ride, I don't get to ride it because it's down. And Top Thrill 2 ran for about 2 weeks beautifully, and everybody who rode it was impressed with it and said it's a phenomenal ride. And when I got there, the ride had been shut down. What Cedar Point was doing was they had Zamperla. They noticed some problems with the trains, and Zamperla came in and modified the train trucks, which is what the wheels are attached to, and reinforced them. The day I was there, you can see people working on the track. There was this guy here, and it looked like he was scraping tape off the stators. I'm not sure why they would have tape on the stators unless those were brand new stators. Stators are the magnets that drive the train forward. Unless they had brand new stators that they had to put in. This thing right here that you're looking at is the transfer track, which gets the train from the station onto the main launch track. And there's the stadium seating where people, like in the past, can sit there and watch the train go back and forth. That was blocked off. You couldn't go up there. Cedar Point also moved the entrance to Top Thrill. You'll see it. It's much farther down the midway. Here is the entrance to Corkscrew. And over on the right is the Breakers Hotel, which is a very large complex. It was recently renovated. And it's not cheap, but it's quite luxurious. And there you see the entrance to Top Thrill 2. Now, thankfully, they placed lockers there because Cedar Point initiated a rule that said you can't bring anything onto the ride. You have to have nothing in your pockets. So no phones, no wallets, no keys, nothing. You have to leave it all with somebody off-ride, or you have to put them in the lockers. And originally, you had to pay for lockers that were in a different location, which upset a lot of people. So it's good to see they put lockers in there so you can stow your stuff before you get on the ride. There are metal detectors. You have to go through a security checkpoint before you get on the ride. And if you have anything in your pockets, they won't let you on. This is actually an extended queue. That's how many people were waiting for this ride a few weeks ago. And there you get a good look at the hotel breakers out there. And as with most other amusement parks, Cedar Point does offer a fast lane. So it's a way you pay a significant amount above and beyond your admission charge, and they allow you to cut the line. As you can tell by the tone of my voice, I'm not a fan of that practice because it's basically class warfare in an amusement park. People who have a lot of money are allowed to cut to the front of the line, whereas people who don't have a lot of money are forced to wait even longer because of the people who have money. I'm not sure why this white fence was still here. This was part of the construction when Cedar Point was redoing Top Thrill, and they left it there for some reason, and I'm not sure why. Maybe they're putting another ride there for next year. I don't know. Here's the entrance to Magnum XL 200, the first roller coaster in the world to break the 200-foot mark. And it's still a really fun ride. It's not as smooth as the coasters you've come to expect these days, where they're all engineered on computer. Back then, they were engineered on paper. And the guy who designed it, Ron Toomer, was a big fan of triangular hills. So on the way back on this ride, be prepared to get out of there with bruised thighs. You get really slammed into your lap bar. It's certainly intense airtime, but it can be a little painful if you aren't careful. We are now approaching the far north end of the park, and on your right is the Gemini. We are on the Gemini Midway. The Gemini is the biggest people eater in the park when it's run. It originally had 6 trains on it, and now they only run 4 trains, but still, that's a lot of capacity on that ride. It's a racing coaster. That is the entrance, or one of the entrances, to Camp Snoopy, which is yet another kiddie area in the park. It's really nicely themed, again, to Peanuts characters. We're going to continue walking down the Gemini Midway here. You can see the Monster, which is a spider ride. And then in front of us is Pipe Scream. Someday I'll have to film a walkthrough here at night, because with all those lights hanging across the Midway, it must look really spectacular in the dark. Coming up on the right over here are the Lake Erie Eagles, and those are essentially just a flying scooter ride, but nicely themed. In the distance, you can see one of the turns of Gemini. Gemini was built in 1978, and at the time, it was the largest roller coaster in the world. And it still is a pretty impressive structure, and it's still a really fun ride. There have been rumors floating around of Cedar Point planning to take it out, and I hope they don't, because it's still really a good, fun time. And like I say, it can cycle an enormous amount of people. And in a park this big, you want rides that can do that. Up over here on the left is the other entrance to Camp Snoopy. There's also a little relaxation area there for adults and kids. And you can see going up the hill is the Woodstock Express, which is a really fun family coaster. And over here on the left is one of my favorite places in the park, the Happy Friar. And why is it one of my favorite places in the park? Because they sell cheese on a stick. Now, last year, when I was at the park, they told me that they had no cheese on a stick because they said there were supply issues. However, they were selling hot dog on a stick, and the only difference between hot dog on a stick and cheese on a stick is cheese. So I was wondering if all the cows in Ohio had died. But this year, they had cheese on a stick. And it wasn't the sort of chewy, awful mozzarella kind. They actually had the American cheese in the middle that was all melted. It was delicious. And if you've never had cheese on a stick, I highly recommend it. All right, so now we're heading along the north end of the park, heading toward the west section. And that will take us into Frontier Town. We're going to be crossing the tracks of the Cedar Point and Lake Erie Railroad here. That big wooden structure that you see is Steel Vengeance. And there it goes. Like I said, Cedar Point is not a theme park. It's truly an amusement park, and this is really one of the only, it's one of two themed sections in the park. It's made to look like an old western town. And the other area that leads into this on the west side of the park is called Frontier Trail, and that's themed as well. So it's sort of like all themed together, this sort of western theme, old Ohio western theme. That roller coaster is the Cedar Creek Mine Ride, which is one of the largest at the time mine train coasters ever built. If you follow that path, it'll take you in essentially a loop that will bring you out to where we're going to end up in a little bit. Down that path is also Skyhawk, which is the park's big screaming swing ride. As you can see on the right, there are a lot of nice rustic buildings, and they're mostly food concessions and gift shops. And there you can get your fortune read by Pappy. Over here on the left is a fairly new area called Big Cedar Farms, and it's a very large eatery that serves all sorts of meats and barbecue stuff, and that took the place of the old antique car ride that was there. And following along here, if you go down this aisle on the right, there are some restrooms. There's also a first aid station there, a little ice cream place. And dead ahead of us, that little building that you see, that's still closed, but it opened up later on in the day, is Sagebrush Sue's. And Sagebrush Sue's sells, I'll try to say that fast 5 times, Sagebrush Sue's sells cheese on a stick. And there you see the lift hill of Steel Vengeance. If you were to go to the right there, it would take you to the entrance to Steel Vengeance. Straight ahead, past Sagebrush Sue's, is the entrance to the north station of the Cedar Point and Lake Erie Railway. This is the entrance to Maverick, which is an extremely intense steel coaster. Very fast and very tight turns on it. And you can see all those people lined up across that bridge there. That is part of the entrance to the ride. So now we're going to follow this path along, and it will take us toward the Frontier Trail area. For reference, you can see the tower of Top Thrill 2 far in the distance there. Over on the left, that's part of Big Cedar Farms. The little stage in the distance you see there is for musical acts that perform country music during the day. That big round building in front of us is basically a storage and maintenance building. And to the right is the Frontier Inn, which serves fried chicken and food like that. The red track that you see above the Frontier Inn is one of the lift hills for Maverick. Now, if you were to follow this path on the left, it would take you around back toward the Cedar Creek mine ride that we saw earlier. There's Skyhawk in the distance. And instead, we're going to bear to the right up here, heading toward Frontier Trail. The crisscrossing blue track that you can see in front of us is Snake River Falls, which is a really good shoot-the-chutes ride. That was not running when we were there. It was a little too early in the season, a little too cool. I don't think people would want to get drenched when the temperature was only 60 degrees out. That huge arching track you see in front of you is Millennium Force, which we'll get to in a little bit. The Frontier Trail area that we're entering is probably the most relaxing area in the park. It's heavily shaded, so it's nice and cool. There's not a lot to do there, which I think is part of the point. There are some shops that you can go into, and there's really only one major ride there, which we'll see in a little bit. Other than that, you're basically just walking through a lovely shaded area onto either the main midway or back to the Frontier Town section. Over on the right is a glass-blowing demonstration and a little shop made of bottles, colored bottles. It's really nice. The booth over here on the left used to have the only vegetarian food in the park, and outside of cheese on a stick. And they closed that, and they were going to reopen it last year as something different, and they never really did, and now all the signs have been pulled off it, so I'm not sure what they're going to do with it. Over on the right is Thunder Canyon, which is the park's River Rapids ride, and you will get completely drenched on that ride. Over here on the left is a little grist mill, historical recreation, and it normally is open. It wasn't open the day I was there. This little path on the right is an observation deck for the river raft ride. Some lockers in case you don't want to get your feet soaked. You can put your shoes in there. And we have a petting zoo. And this, again, wasn't open while I was there. It opened later on in the day. But Barnyard is basically just for kids. It's a little petting zoo. And they have all different types of animals in there. And up here on the left is basically not much of anything anymore. It used to be the Forbidden Frontier, which was a really neat concept where you were part of a story that evolved while you were in that section, and you tried to solve problems and help out the settlers. I thought it was a great idea, but it was really resource intensive, and so they decided to just can it. So there's nothing there except for Frontier Fling. And that's a sky coaster. So it's basically like a bungee drop. And all these buildings that you see in this area were either acquired and rebuilt So they were authentic buildings, or they were recreations of authentic buildings. And they look wonderful. It's a really neat feeling in this area. Most of them have little shops in them, like souvenir shops or craft shops. And some of them are food concessions. And this little path, I'd never noticed it before. It looks like this path, it leads you to another attraction, because it says back there, Built and Trails, and it looks like some sort of fun house or attraction or indoor thing, but no, it's just a maintenance area. At least it keeps with the theming. And this sign gives you a little historical context for the buildings in the area. Over here on the left, they used to have pony rides. I'm not sure if they're still doing that anymore. And then this little outhouse, you notice everybody keeps going over there trying to open the outhouse. All these kids always rush up there. And Cedar Point knows that, so they did a cute thing with the outhouse. It was just there as a decoration, but in order to make it something a little more interactive, here's what happens.
Quit pulling on the door.
All right, so here is the little tunnel leading us back toward the main midway. There goes Millennium Force. Millennium Force was built in 2000, and that's why it's called Millennium. And it was at the time the tallest and fastest and steepest roller coaster in the world, 305 feet high. And it was built for speed, 95 miles an hour. And it's just relentless. There aren't a lot of hills in it. There are maybe 3 or 4 hills that give you a lot of airtime. But generally, you're just low to the ground going fast. I mean, race car fast. And it's one of the most popular rides in the park. There's one of the old steam engines that used to run on the Cedar Point Lake Erie Railroad. It's just there as a decoration now. But they do have plenty of soda. There's good old Auntie Anne's pretzels. There are a couple of those concessions in the park. And ahead of us now is the return track for Millennium Force, along with the lift hill and first drop of Valravn. Over on the left is the Red Garter Saloon, which has shows, and it's also you can get food there. And over on the right is a panda garden. So there are plenty of places to eat in the park. Cedar Point has been pulling back on the national brands over the past few years. They used to have a lot more. I mean, they still have a Chicky and Pete's, but they used to have Chick-fil-A, Toffs, like I said, and a lot of other big vendors in the park. Johnny Rockets was another one they had. But they've been pulling back on that and just making generic food places that they own and they control. Panda Garden's one of the last. Auntie Anne's is there. But that's about it. Most of it is all in-house now. So, here we go back onto the main midway. There is the queue line for Millennium Force. It is a massive queue line, and it often will fill up, which means if it's filled, you're going to be 2 to 3 hours waiting to get on the coaster. And into the brake run. The big orange coaster here on the left is Rougarou. which started life as Mantis, a really intense stand-up coaster. Now it's a really intense sit-down coaster. And there is the entrance to Millennium Force. I was lucky. When I was there early in the day, I was able to get on that ride, and the wait was maybe 20 minutes, which is very unusual. And that was for the front seat. And we're coming up on another railroad crossing, and over on the right is the station, the South Station, for the Cedar Point and Lake Erie Railroad. And it's an authentic coal-fired steam engine, and it's one of the highest capacity rides in the park. As you can see, it is huge, and it gives you a nice ride. And they're very different rides. If you go from the South Station to the north, it rides along the shores of Lake Erie. It's very picturesque. And then when you go from the North Station to the south, it goes through Boneville, which is this very humorous animatronic area with skeletons doing very silly things. There goes Valravn in the distance. There's the station. And now coming up on the left is the station for Iron Dragon, which we saw near the beginning of this video. And there's also, in the distance on the left, a stage area where they put on shows, and they have lots of lighting effects and everything, and you can see it's a big area for the audience to stand around. Valravn is a drop coaster. The cars are extremely wide. They seat 8 people across in 3 levels deep. And when you get to the top of the lift hill, it stops you there. There's a chain that grabs you, and it just hangs you looking vertical, straight down 90 degrees, and then it drops you. That's quite a thrill. And it looks like the stage is getting a new paint job for the season. Last year, I think they had skateboarding is what they were doing there with music and dance. There's a little wall of flowers around Valravn, and there are picnic tables there where you can sit out and relax. Over here on the left is Coaster's Diner, and they have a little performance area where some cast members come out and they perform 50s style songs about Cedar Point. And also in the distance you can see, way in the distance you can see Windseeker, and there's also the station, the North Station for the Sky Ride. And that's bringing us back right onto the main Midway where we came in. The performers were rehearsing all day that day. They were out there. Every time I went by, they were out there rehearsing. They must have been exhausted at the end of the day. The building in front of us with all the domes on it is the famous Cedar Point Coliseum, which has some offices in there, but on the main floor as you enter, it's a gargantuan arcade. And this year, the arcade also had and this, I guess they put it in last year, but I didn't see it last year. They put in a small mini golf course inside there. They used to have a lot of pinball machines, which was really nice, but they got rid of those. And there was also a marching band competition going on that day. The building over on the left that looks sort of oriental, that is the Pagoda gift shop, which is one of the best gift shops in the park. It's also one of the oldest buildings in the park. And they had there, from last year, they had them for the 60th anniversary of the Cedar Point and Lake Erie Railroad. They had a Lionel recreation. Well, it's Lionel's General, but it's the Lionel recreation of the Cedar Point and Lake Erie Railroad engine and coal car. So it's a really, really good gift shop. I really enjoy going in there and taking home things I really don't need, but I really like. Over on the right is the Cadillac Cars, which is the last antique car ride in the park. They used to have 3 antique car rides. That's the last of them. There's Derby Dogs, and it's called Derby Dogs because it's right next to the Cedar Downs, which is one of the last racing derbies in the world. Great ride. Cedar Downs is incredibly fast, and it's a racing carousel where the horses actually move forward and backwards side by side as well as going up and down. It's highly recommended. The green track on the right in front of us is Raptor, which is one of the best inverted roller coasters ever built. Still really packs an intense wallop. If we were to go left from here, that would take us to where we went at the beginning of the video, down toward the boardwalk area. If you were to go underneath the Raptor, where all those people are going, that takes you to another little section that takes you to the Blue Streak, which is one of my favorite roller coasters in the park. It is the oldest roller coaster in the park, built in 1964. And it also takes you to the entrance to Valravn. And there's also Chicky and Pete's over there. Another one of the last of the brands for the restaurants. There's the Blue Streak station in the distance. Over on the left, where all the bricks are there, are people who purchased a brick in celebration of the park's 150th anniversary. Karen and I were among those, so our name is there somewhere. And it has the little cupola of the lift hill of the Blue Streak on the brick. And in the distance you can see Gatekeeper going around. In front of us now is Hugo's, which is a very large restaurant. And they have a lot of Italian food in there, your typical pasta. There's the entrance to Raptor. And underneath the south station of the Sky Ride is CP Shop, which is another really nice gift shop that has a lot of coaster-themed gifts. And then to the right of that is the Jack Aldrich Theater, which has shows, little musical shows that go on all day. And you can see the Mueller Carousel in front of us there. And that brings us back toward the entrance of the park. So, in conclusion, as you can see, Cedar Point is huge. There is an enormous amount of stuff to do, and it has rides and attractions for all ages, which I really appreciate. It's not just a teen thrill park like a Six Flags. It has a lot of stuff for every age group to do. It also has lots of good food, lots of really unique gifts. So it makes for a wonderful place to go if you like old-style amusement parks, like county fair, carnival style. This is the place to go. Oh, also one other little concession over on the right here is the French Quarter, which has really good pastries. So if you're in the northern Ohio area, it is well worth your time to take a visit for a couple days to Cedar Point in Sandusky. Because, as the sign says, life needs more Cedar Point.